The skies above Virion Prime were once silent and peaceful. Tall mountains kissed the clouds while rivers danced under twin suns. Its people, the Kyrr, believed they were born to dominate, carved from starlight and metal. Their bodies were strong, and their skin could stop bullets. They had not known defeat in 1,000 years of war, and they had started calling themselves gods. But peace had made them proud and lazy. Then came the Zurn, a race from the far side of the black storms. They were like shadows shaped into armor. They had no eyes, no mouths, only shrieks that broke stone and melted circuits. At first, the Kyrr laughed. They sent a small legion to test these beasts. That legion never returned. Days passed and their capital received only static from the battlefield. Then the sky burned. Flames rained down on their outer cities. The Kyr's leader, Arch-Warlord Tenrik, declared total war. Factories roared back to life. Giant machines stomped across forests, ready to crush the enemy. Their champions, forged in combat and trained to kill without mercy, led the first strike. One of them, Commander Verask, was said to have killed 100 rebels with a single plasma blade. Another, Lady Kheera, crushed tanks with her bare hands. Together, they were unstoppable, or so everyone believed. The Zurn didn't fight like any known army. They didn't take prisoners. They didn't flee. They fought like dying wolves, clawing, biting, melting through Kyrr lines. Within a week, half the Kyr's border colonies fell. The gods were bleeding. Still, Tenrik refused to believe they could lose. He demanded more power, more weapons, and forced his champions to obey every brutal order without question. But cracks had started to form. Commander Verask began to question why they were dying to protect pride. He whispered in secret that maybe the Kyrr weren't as divine as they claimed. Lady Kheera caught wind of his doubts and reported him. Tenrik, angry and scared, ordered Verask's arrest. But Verask didn't surrender. He turned on his guards, escaped with loyal fighters, and disappeared into the mountains. From that moment, the war split in two. The Kyrr were now fighting on two fronts. On one side, the Zurn kept pushing deeper. On the other, Verask's rebellion started growing. Some said he had made contact with the humans. Others claimed he found ancient tech that could kill gods. Tenrik called him a traitor and promised death to all who followed him. But the more brutal Tenrik became, the more soldiers deserted. The once unbreakable Kyrr army was crumbling from within. Lady Kheera, still loyal to Tenrik, was sent to find Verask and kill him. She took her most trusted squad and tracked him across ice and flame. But as she closed in, she began to see the truth. The soldiers she captured didn't speak with hate. They spoke with sadness. They said Verask wanted to save their people, not destroy them. One prisoner begged her to listen before it was too late. That night, Kheera couldn't sleep. Verask sent her a message. It came through a hacked war drone. His voice was calm but filled with fire. He said the real enemy was not each other, but the madness at the top. He begged her to meet him face to face. Her squad told her it was a trap. But in her heart, something felt different. She agreed to go alone, just to listen. She walked into the valley unarmed. Verask was waiting there. His armor was scratched and dented, but he still stood tall. The fire in his eyes hadn't faded. Behind him, human engineers worked side by side. With rebel Kyrr, they weren't building weapons. They were building shields, shelters, food processors. Kheera saw children laughing. She saw soldiers smiling, not with victory, but with hope. And suddenly, she felt afraid. Verask offered her a hand. Not for war, for peace. He said the Kyrr could be more than warriors. They could build again, heal, change, but Tenrik would never allow it. The Arch-Warlord would destroy the entire planet before giving up control. Kheera didn't answer at first. Her whole life had been built on obedience, pride, and blood. Now, her next choice would decide the future of their kind. Lady Kyrr stood in the middle of the rebel camp, watching the people she once called traitors. They were not weak or broken. They were organized, calm, and united. Human doctors treated wounded Kyrr, young cadets trained under both races. The air was not filled with orders or fear, but with quiet determination. For the first time she felt her armor was too heavy. She did not know who the enemy was anymore. Verask spoke with her under the shade of a giant steel tree. He did not speak like a traitor. He spoke like someone who had seen too much death. He told her the humans did not come to conquer. They came because Verask asked for help when no one else would. They came because they had fought monsters like the Zurn before and survived. He asked her to join them, not as a fighter, but as a protector. Kyrr wanted to scream. She wanted to punch him and drag him back to Tenrik. But deep inside, a voice asked her a quiet question. What if Verask was right? What if Tenrik had lost his mind? Her hand touched the hilt of her blade, but her feet refused to move. She looked at Verask, and she didn't see a coward. She saw a soldier who was still fighting for their people. That night, Kyrr sat alone by the fire. A small Kyrr child came and offered her food. The child had no fear, only innocent eyes. Kyrr took the food and watched the stars. Somewhere above, Tenrik's ships patrolled, ready to strike. If she didn't return, he would declare her a traitor. She would lose everything: her title, her honor, her legacy. But she was already losing her purpose. The next morning, Kyrr requested a direct communication line with Tenrik. Verask allowed it, but warned her it would be tracked. She agreed. Her voice trembled as she spoke to the warlord. She told him the truth: Verask was not the enemy. The rebellion was not a threat. They were building something better. But Tenrik's face turned cold as stone. He ordered her execution on sight. The transmission ended with fire. Tenrik had locked onto her position. Within minutes, orbital cannons fired down from the sky. Explosions tore through the forest. Kyrr ran, grabbing the child she had met. Verask shouted orders as his people scattered. The shields held, barely, but homes were destroyed. Trees became ash. The rebels moved to emergency tunnels beneath the mountains. Tenrik had declared war on his own blood. Kyrr had now crossed the line. She was one of them. Her name would be erased from the records. But she did not cry. She stood beside Verask as the rebels regrouped underground. Human engineers began building new defenses. Verask handed her a weapon, an old plasma rifle from her academy days. It was not a symbol of war, but of trust. For the first time, she accepted it with both hands. Days passed, and the rebels planned a bold move. They would not strike Tenrik directly. They would broadcast the truth across all Kyrr-controlled systems. Let the people see what Tenrik had become. Let the civilians decide who was truly loyal to the Empire. Verask asked Kyrr to lead the strike team into the capital relay tower. She agreed without hesitation. The capital was more silent than she remembered. Posters of Tenrik were everywhere. Soldiers marched with empty eyes. Drones floated above the streets, watching everything. Kyrr moved with her team through the tunnels, using old access codes from her officer days. Her fingers trembled as they passed the statue of her former self, once praised as the Empire's shield. Now, she was the one trying to pierce it. They reached the relay tower. Inside, systems blinked with ancient power. One human tech and 2 rebel Kyrr worked fast to set the broadcast. Just as they were ready, the alarms blared. Tenrik's elite guards stormed the tower. Kyrr and her team fought back. Blades clashed. Plasma burned the air. She faced her former student, now sent to kill her. Their duel shook the steel floor. She disarmed him, but did not strike. She told him to listen, not fight. He hesitated, just enough for the broadcast to begin. The screens across the capital lit up. Images of the destroyed villages, peaceful rebels. and Tenric's orders to attack his own cities played on every wall. The people froze. Some soldiers lowered their weapons. A whisper of truth had pierced the Empire's silence. Outside, the people began to chant. Some for Verask, some for peace. Tenric, watching from his command throne, roared with rage. He ordered every drone, every fighter, every weapon to strike the relay tower. But Kyrr's team had already escaped. The signal was spreading faster. Then he could destroy it. Across the stars, the Kyrr were waking up, and now nothing would ever be the same again. The capital streets burned with noise and fire. The people were not running in fear, they were marching. Protests rose from every corner. Kyrr civilians broke the statues of Tenric. His face, once worshipped as the face of strength, was now the image of betrayal. The Empire's oldest war temples had closed their gates. For the first time in Kyrr history, the priests refused to bless the war. The people had chosen to see the truth. Inside the mountain base, Verask stood before a growing map. Red mark showed Tenric's remaining forces. Blue showed the rebellion. Yellow showed zones that had stopped obeying either side. Humans brought in fresh intel. Kyrr deserters kept arriving in small groups. Every hour, the tide shifted more in their favor. But Verask's face remained hard. He knew the war was far from over. Lady Kheera led new training sessions. Once, she used these techniques to beat rebels into surrender. Now she taught rebels how to survive elite strikes. She moved among humans and Kyrr without judgment. But when alone, she stared at her own armor, wondering how many lives it had taken. She cleaned it each night, not to honor it, but to remind herself what must never return. She would wear the armor until the war ended, then never again. Far across the stars, Tenric unleashed his last weapon. Project Deathline, an ancient satellite array, built to erase entire continents from orbit. It had never been used before. Now Tenric aimed it at his own world. He declared that if he couldn't rule Kyrr, no one would. His generals begged him to reconsider. He executed 3 on the spot. The rest obeyed out of fear, not loyalty. Verask knew they had only days. If Tenric fired the deathline, the planet would die. Millions would burn. Rebel, loyalist, child, elder, none would survive. He called for a final plan. They would not fight Tenric's army. They would go for his throne. A deep strike, one chance to stop the deathline's activation. Kheera stepped forward before he even finished speaking. She said she would lead the strike team herself. Verask hesitated. Kheera was their strongest blade, but also their last light of unity. If she fell, the rebellion could collapse. But she only smiled and said this war must end with action, not fear. Verask gave her a nod. The plan was simple but deadly. Infiltrate the royal fortress, bypass security, and reach the deathline controls. Before countdown completed, they had less than 72 hours. The human pilot, Reyes, would fly them through the orbital blockade. Reyes had survived crash landings on 3 different war worlds. He laughed as he checked his scratched helmet. "Only job I ever had where gods hire me to kill other gods," he joked. Beside him, Kheera tightened her gloves. She was not smiling. She was preparing her final battle, one way or another. This would be her last mission. As they launched into orbit, Tenric's radar picked them up. Fighters swarmed from above. Rays spun through clouds, dodging fire with impossible speed. Kheera and her team dropped from the ship at high altitude, using stealth suits. They landed deep inside the fortress grounds. Explosions lit the sky behind them as rays drew attention away from the strike. Each second gained was a life saved. Inside the fortress, they moved like shadows. Every hallway was filled with traps. Every door had guards. Kheera's team moved. Without mercy, but not with hate, only duty. She saw her old friends on the other side of the fight. She saw their hesitation. Some lowered weapons, some turned away. They were tired of dying for a madman. The fortress had cracks not just in walls, but in hearts. They reached the deathline chamber. A tall tower, pulsing with red light. Tenrek stood alone before the main console. His armor was golden, untouched by war. But his face was cracked with rage. He called Kheera a traitor, a disgrace, a broken tool. She walked forward without a word. He lifted a weapon. She didn't blink. The others stayed back as the two titans faced each other. Their duel was silent, brutal, filled with fury and memory. Every strike was heavy with the weight of a shattered empire. Tenrek fought like the war god he claimed to be. But Kheera fought like someone with nothing left to lose. She disarmed him, blade at his throat, but didn't kill. Instead, she turned to the console. She entered the override code, stopping the countdown at 3 seconds. Tenrek roared and charged. But Verask appeared from the lift, striking him down. The warlord fell, not with glory, but with silence. No one cheered. No one celebrated. Kheera collapsed to her knees, her armor cracked. Verask reached her and placed a hand on her shoulder. Outside, the skies began to clear. The satellites powered down. The world had survived, but the time for gods was over. The death of Arch-Warlord Tenrek spread across the stars like fire on dry leaves. His golden mask was broken, and his name was erased from the war chants. The great towers that once echoed with his commands now stood empty. The Kyrr people watched the broadcast of his fall in silence. They were not sad. They were not angry. They were numb. Their god had been mortal after all. Verask stood before the council of rebel leaders. Humans, Kyrr, and other alien allies formed a ring of tired eyes and worn hands. He spoke of rebuilding, of peace, of never again following one voice into madness. The deathline was dismantled. The weapons were locked away. But the hardest task was not disarming machines. It was healing the wounds in the hearts of a broken people. Kheera lay in a recovery chamber, wrapped in biogel and wires. Her body was cracked, bones crushed, organs damaged. But her spirit never flickered. Human medics worked alongside Kyrr healers, doing everything they could. Every few hours, a child from the refugee camps left a flower or token at her door. She had become more than a warrior. She was now a symbol of choice. Outside, the new world began to take shape. Cities once filled with sirens now echoed with music. Soldiers built homes instead of bunkers. Engineers redirected power from cannons to schools. Verask passed through each district quietly, helping where he could, not giving orders but listening. He had no throne. He did not want one. He believed leadership was not about power but service. Still, not everyone wanted peace. Small groups of Tenrek's loyalists refused to surrender. They saw the rebels as weak. They believed war was the only true path. One group attacked a medical outpost, killing unarmed staff. Another tried to reactivate the old war machines hidden under the ocean. Verask knew ignoring them would bring back the same darkness, so he sent messages, not armies. He invited the loyalists to speak, not to surrender, but to talk. Some refused. Others came with rage in their hearts. But when they saw human children playing beside Kyrr elders, something broke inside them. They had been raised to believe that only war gave meaning. But now they saw life without fear, without shouting, without loss. Some lowered their weapons and asked to build instead. Kheera awoke after 23 days. Her first word was child. She wanted to know if the young Kyrr she saved was safe. The nurses smiled and said the girl had started training as a healer. Kheera closed her eyes and rested again. She did not ask about medals or victory. She only wanted to know the world she bled for still lived. Months passed. The old war banners were burned in a silent ceremony. New symbols were chosen, simple, peaceful, filled with meaning. One showed a Kyrr hand holding a human one. Another, a cracked helmet growing flowers. No leader claimed ownership. The people decided what the future looked like. Kyrr stood beside Verask on a hill, looking down at the new capital. It was built from ruins, but it did not feel ruined anymore. One night, Verask received a call from the Outer Rim. A scout ship had returned with strange news. A massive fleet was spotted near the collapsed Black Star Zone. The fleet was not Zurn, not human, not Kyrr, unknown, silent, watching. Verask felt a chill in his bones. The war had ended, but peace had made them visible to others. He knew the galaxy was still full of hungry eyes. He called a meeting of old fighters and new builders. This time, they did not speak of weapons, but of unity. If the new threat came, they would not fight alone. Humans, Kyrr, and all allies would stand together. Not with pride, but with purpose. Not to conquer, but to protect the peace they had paid for with blood. Kheera, still weak, asked to speak at that meeting. She spoke from a wheelchair, her voice soft but unshaken. She reminded them that strength was not in armor, but in knowing when not to wear it. She asked them to remember the children, the laughter, the music. She warned them that war should never again be their first answer. And when she finished, there was silence. Then everyone stood and clapped, not out of duty, but out of truth. That night, a small girl walked up to Kheera and placed a white flower on her lap. The girl said her name was Kheera, named after the Kyrr, hero who saved her family. Kheera smiled for the first time in many months. She placed her hand gently on the girl's shoulder. She did not need titles anymore. She had already won what mattered most. In the cold void beyond the Black Star Zone, the mysterious fleet drifted without sound. No signals came from it, no threats. No lights, just hundreds of black vessels shaped like knives, standing still between stars. Human probes sent to investigate vanished without a trace. Even Kyrr scanners, built to see through war clouds, returned only static. Something was watching, and it didn't blink. Verask knew this silence was not peace. It was the quiet breath before a storm. The new alliance held emergency meetings. No one had seen ships like these. Not even the oldest human captains or Kyrr historians. The galaxy was vast, and it seemed the end of one war had opened the door to another. They needed to prepare, but not with panic. Kheera visited the command chambers with support braces on her legs. She had not returned to battle gear, but her mind was sharp. She asked a simple question: why now? Why had this fleet arrived only after Tenric's fall? A young human strategist said maybe the warlord's madness had hidden them. Or maybe his chaos had distracted them. Now that there was peace, they could finally see the darkness outside. Verask organized silent defense posts around key planets. Shields were activated but hidden. Patrols doubled. Messages were sent to all corners of the galaxy, asking for knowledge. Some old alien races replied with fear, others with warnings. One message came from a dying star system, where only one word was recorded before all signal died: extinction. Despite the fear, the people did not collapse. Humans shared old survival tactics from Earth's darkest days. Kyrr engineers built fusion walls powered by sun cores. Children practiced drills not for war, but for safety. They were not preparing to conquer. They were preparing to endure. Even fear had to make room for hope. Reyes, the reckless human pilot, returned with news. He and his scout team had entered the edge of the unknown zone and found something strange. An entire planet had been stripped. Clean, no water, no cities, no life. Just black marks burned into the surface in perfect circles. At the center was a symbol carved deep into the crust. It was a mirror, reflecting the face of whoever looked at it. Kheera held a meeting with Verask in the quiet gardens behind the capital. She said maybe the enemy wasn't a species, but something worse, something that learned. A force that copied and mirrored the strength of others. She feared it had been watching the Kyrr for centuries, waiting for them to fall. Now it would test what came next, Not just warriors, but those who chose peace. That night, the stars flickered strangely. 3 moons dimmed for a few minutes before returning. Scientists found nothing wrong. But the people began lighting candles anyway. Stories spread that the enemy was already inside the stars, listening to thoughts, learning fear. Some wanted to run. Others said they should strike first. Verask told them to stand, not with fists, but with unity. He called for something bold. A message, not of power, but of peace. A galaxy-wide broadcast showing humans and Kyrr working side by side. He invited other races to speak. He invited old enemies to forgive. Not everyone agreed, but enough did. The message was sent in all directions, reaching the edge of the black zone. There was no reply, but the fleet moved. The black ships shifted slightly, no longer still. They began forming new shapes in space. One cluster stretched into a spiral. Another shaped a circle. Scientists tried to decode it. Kheera stood before the map and noticed something strange. The patterns matched an old Kyrr symbol from before the War Age. The symbol meant test. Suddenly, the signals changed. A single drone returned from the black zone, undamaged. It carried no threat, no message, just a cube. Inside the cube was a projection of a battlefield. Not real, but virtual. It showed Kyrr, humans, and other races inside a controlled zone, watched from above. There were no weapons, just choices. Save or destroy. Build or abandon. Trust or betray. It was not a war invitation, it was a trial. Verask said the message was clear. The enemy didn't want blood. It wanted to see what peace was worth. Would the united galaxy protect each other without violence? Would they hold their unity when tested by fear, doubt, and pressure? Kheera said it was the final test of their new world, not strength of arm, but strength of soul. The cube glowed again, showing one word in every known language. A word not spoken in pride, but in challenge. It said, show. Then the cube powered. Down, the fleet stayed silent. No invasion came. But everyone knew the trial had begun. Not on the battlefield, but inside every heart, every city, every choice they made from that moment. And failure would bring more than just defeat. It would bring extinction. The world did not end in fire or silence. It ended in a choice. The cube sent by the Black Fleet remained in the center of the capital. Day by day, it continued to show new simulations. Each one was different. In one, 2 cities argued over scarce food. In another, a sick child was denied care by strangers. No guns, no war, only moments to act, and every choice was recorded by unseen eyes. Verask gathered his team and allies once more. He asked them to study the simulations. Not for tactics, but for truth. He said this was the first time a galaxy was being judged not by its weapons, but by its values. Kheera agreed and added one thing: if they failed, it would not be because they were weak. It would be because they refused to change. New councils were formed in every region. Humans and Kyrr, once enemies, sat together in circles instead of command rooms. They spoke of laws not based on strength, but on fairness. The people voted to remove war schools and build centers of wisdom. Old generals became teachers. Veterans became storytellers. Pain was not forgotten, but it was transformed. They were building a culture that honored survival, not conquest. In one simulation, a Kyrr trader refused to help a starving human child. The cube glowed red. In another, a group of children helped rebuild a broken shelter with no command. The cube glowed blue. Over weeks, a pattern became clear. The fleet outside was watching kindness, sacrifice, empathy, and truth. It responded to unity and punished pride. The trial was real, and it was personal. One day, the cube went dark. Then it played a final test. In the image, a plague spread across a colony. The people panicked. Some ran, some stole, some hid. But one healer stayed behind alone, risking her life to save strangers. That healer looked exactly like Kheera. It was not real, but it felt real. The trial had remembered her. Kheera stood in front of the cube, her body still healing, her mind steady. She pressed her hand on its surface and whispered words only her people knew. She promised not that they would be perfect, but that they would never stop trying. She said peace was not something to protect, but something to practice. The cube accepted her words without reply. Then, without sound, the black fleet began to dissolve. One by one, the ships vanished like ash and wind. No attack came. No message followed, only silence. The trial was over. No one knew if they passed or if the test simply ended. But deep down, everyone felt something shift in the air, as if the galaxy had finally exhaled. Verask stood on the balcony of the Capitol Tower, looking up at the quiet stars. He didn't smile, but he rested his hand on the railing with peace. He turned to Kheera, who now walked without braces. She had chosen not to wear armor again. Around them, the sounds of laughter, work, and song rose from the streets. It was not victory, it was survival with meaning. Reyes, the human pilot, was last to leave the war zone. He flew across the rebuilt skyways, his ship older but his heart lighter. Before leaving orbit, he looked down at the green and blue planet below. It had once been a forge of war and now grew gardens across its ruins. He radioed one last message, maybe. Gods can fall, but people can rise. Years passed. The war was remembered, but not worshipped. Statues of leaders were replaced by carvings of children planting trees. History was not erased, but written with honesty. New races visited. Trade flourished. And no black ships were ever seen again. Some believed the Watchers had moved on. Others said they were still watching, waiting for weakness. But fear no longer ruled the hearts of the people. Kheera became a teacher, telling her story to the next generation. She showed her cracked armor not as a prize but as a warning. Her final lesson was simple. A strong hand can lift or destroy. A sharp mind can trick or teach. And a brave heart is not the one that rushes to fight, but the one that dares to trust. Her students listened, and they remembered. Verask never took a title. He walked among the people as one of them. When asked what ended the age of war, he pointed not to a weapon or a strategy. He pointed to a single moment when one soldier stepped into a rebel camp and chose to listen instead of strike. That moment lit the path for all that followed. And in that path, the galaxy found peace worth fighting. A 4.